Man, sometimes there's nothing better than just throwing in some good old 80s fantasy. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about the first Book of Swords by Fred Saberhage, and this version has the first three, the Book of Swords, and this was a patron pick by one of my high-tier patrons, Jennifer, and thanks so much for picking this because this was just exactly what I needed. I had so much fun with it. It was just great. So I read a lot of the whole last King of Asgard and just some other big, dense epic fantasy series over the last couple of months, and so I was definitely ready for a break, but I also was just going to be fitting this in anyway, and it just really worked because this is very 80s fantasy. It is actually from the 80s, I should say, in a good way, by the way. I mean that, but it's fast paced, it's action packed, it's just everything moving along, happening, and it just is light and fun while at the same time having a lot of big action and serious things kind of going on as well. And it just really was the perfect thing that I felt like I needed at the moment, and so I was pretty happy with the pick. So I will say this is, like I said, it's very 80s fantasy, and if you don't know what I mean, but when I say 80s fantasy, typically I associate that. This is another reason I like doing those decades of fantasy videos, kind of talking about, hey, what came out, what was typical of this decade, because when I say like 90s fantasy or 80s fantasy, immediately I know exactly what comes to mind for me, and it's interesting looking at other decades as well. But 80s fantasy, a lot of it, you have like the faster paced stuff, lots of action, and a lot of it to like you have a lot of like the D&D type of books or like Dragonlance or that and the other thing that were popular at the time. So fast paced, a lot of action, a lot of stuff going on, and some of it with the lighter tone as well. Of course, that's not everything, but there's a lot of it there, and it's kind of one of the things I think about with being that 80s style. And this book fits that extremely well. It is very fast-paced with a lot of action and just kind of like light and fun, while at the same time just being really easy to read. And this one I was immediately pulled in because the setup for this is the god Vulcan, who's the blacksmith god. This does use like the Greek gods because it mentions like Vulcan and Hermes and Mars. So it mentions it uses those gods, but otherwise sets up its own type of lore and other stuff besides that. But the god Vulcan is preparing his forge, is like pulling fire from the core of the earth and getting ready to go, and thinks like, man, I could really use some human slaves to help out with this, and so calls to some humans to come, one of which a blacksmith to help forge, and then otherwise he needs some blood to quench the blades in, of course, as well. And so forges these 12 magical swords, all of which have a name and different types of like power that go with them, and they're kind of distributed, and there's allusions to this game of the gods that's going to be happening with the swords. And I just immediately, I was so pulled in. I was just like, yes, this sounds so cool. I'm so pulled in, and just even that setup just feels so 80s. And once again, whenever I'm saying this, I mean this in a positive way. It's just it really does have that feel, and it worked really well for me. And then the main character that we're following is Mark, who is the son of said blacksmith, who comes back with only one arm, but with one of these swords, which is Town Saver, or the Sword of Fury. And of course, he's 13, and trouble ends up, and he ends up on the run with the sword and that kind of thing. So your typical, type of setup there, but there's a lot more that is set up in here. We have some other characters and POVs. We have kind of the bad guy Duke, who's very cruel. We have the kind Sir Andrew as well, though, so we have a kind knight as well. We see some other rulers, all kinds of different creatures and lore around dragons and other beasts. There's something called the Grey Horde. We have like gods plus other entities, all of the different kinds of things with the swords, with other things. And so there's a ton of lore that's established, all while moving at a very fast pace with a lot of action, not really stopping to hang out and, explain things. It's that kind of like, let's go, let's talk through all this stuff and do it. And it's something that I do very much associate with the 80s for sure. And this was just, like I said, this was a lot of fun. It does too start at the beginning, which I thought was kind of fun, with the Song of Swords, which is several, quite a few stanzas where it's going over the names and kind of the natures of each of these swords, including things like the Sword of Justice, balances the pans of right and wrong and foul and fair. Eye for an eye, doom giver scans, the fate of all folk everywhere. As well as, what else do we have? Far Slayer howls across the world, for thy heart, who hast wronged me. Vengeance is his who casts the blade, yet he will in the end no triumph see. The whole thing's not written that way, by the way. That's the old-timey thing you gotta have, because there's, of course, also like thousands of years of history here that I assume we'll slowly learn about as we go along with the series. But just a kind of a fun setup and a cool way to start it with a bang that definitely pulled me in. And then as far as the writing style with this one, it is very, very readable and approachable. So this I know a couple of people had commented that this was kind of marketed more toward teenagers, which I think fantasy in the 80s, a lot of it was sort of marketed there because people are like, oh, that's who's going to like this, teenage boys, which wasn't necessarily true then or now. So I don't think this reads particularly young. It is it's very readable, and there's not going to be a big bar for entry to read, but it didn't read like it was just really young focused. We do have, 13-year-old main character, but then we have other characters that are adults and other things going on as well. So it just it was fun and easy to read, but didn't feel like really, really young focusing. And when I say the fun, easy to read and readable, it's also not overly simplistic either, though. It's what I kind of liked about this too, and why sometimes even with the lighter, more fun older fantasies is still like the writing style here is still a little bit elevated, even though it's not going up to like really high notches, but it definitely feels a step above some of the more overly simplistic modern writing that you get. That's a little bit more popular. So really, really easy to read, but also still has that little bit of extra that I like to have at least something in fantasy. So I feel like that was really interesting here as well. This book, though, just like I said, for really short, and it's in this edition that I have, it's like 200 pages. I think on its own, it's around 300, but just for such a short book, there's so much that happens. There's so much action. There's so much lore. There's so many different things going on and just so many great moments, lines. I just had so much fun with it. Now, this is also in something that I do think about with this kind of time period and this kind of book. You do have some of the plot conveniences. You have some of the things that just sort of happen and don't necessarily get explained, or that happen just really quickly and abruptly occasionally. So it's the kind of thing that in this sort of book doesn't really bother me. I might complain about it in another book because it just depends. This, though, with the feel and what this book is, it's something that I just kind of, I guess my brain accepts it and I don't have a problem with it, even though I might some others. But you do have to be aware of that when you're reading. This is the kind of book that this falls into, where you're going to have some of that kind of stuff as well. But it just is, it's just fun and exciting and engaging. So at least for me, I didn't really care. And I still had a lot of fun with this. This was just really solid and something I'm going to enjoy continuing as well. I would say, I mentioned some other 80s things. I think that if you like kind of the D&D style of 80s fantasy books like Dragonlance or Forgotten Realms, that type of thing, I think that this is something that you would also like. This isn't really super D&D, but just the idea of the magical swords and kind of the reference to a god, the gods having a game, has some of that kind of feel, and I think people who like that will like this as well as if you just like 80s fantasy. If you immediately, when I say that, you're like, yes, I like that, you're going to probably like this as well. And then for something that's newer, Mike Mullman's Protectors of Brittany, I have described that as very 80s fantasy as well, which I think is what he's going for. Apparently, he's also a fan of this series because I saw a review from him on Goodreads, so I thought that was kind of fun after I'd started this. Yeah, that's another one that feels very 80s with just kind of the tone and the feel of it and the fast pace. So I think also if you like that, this is another one that you may like as well, so good to check out. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was a great time. So thanks again to Jennifer for picking this for your high tier patron pick. I'm looking forward to continuing from here. But let me know in the comments if you've read this as well. Like I said, not many people mentioned it. I was not familiar with this at all before this was the patron pick. So this was a really nice surprise. But let me know your thoughts on this if you have read it. Otherwise, if you have other obscure or just maybe lesser known classic older fantasy book series, let me know. Always happy to add more to my list from there, so definitely let me know in the comments. That's it for this one, though. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you. And, of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.